Good afternoon, this is Charles Kelly. How you doing? Money Tips. Today we've heard that Boris has, actually announced it kind of yesterday, but he's been talking about it in Parliament today, is planning a sort of build campaign, and he's announced sweeping reforms to the planning process as him and his ministers feel that local authorities are blocking developments and slowing up the process in general for home building projects. Now, I'm not sure that's actually true, but I'm going to go through. I mean, yesterday I said that I talked about how they're planning to build hospitals and schools and that sort of thing, and I said that I think they should be looking at a more business aspect of getting the country back to work. And I think there are plans in force to try and do that, and certainly looking at things like electric cars and hydrogen power, which is very rarely mentioned nowadays, but there are buses already running on hydrogen. But today I want to talk about the planning side of things as well. Now, this comes as annual house prices, the growth in annual house price fell for the first time in 8 years, but it's only a small amount, by 0.1%, but this was up until June. Now, we've already had other falls in the market on more recently measured basis, like you can measure it by month to month or quarterly, but on an annual basis, June to June, this was the first fall, according to the nationwide survey, since 2012. They also said, I mean, in more recent times, we've seen in March and April falls higher than that. We saw a fall of 1.4% drop since May, and a slight recovery in June in some other areas. So you've got to look at all the data. I mean, the ONS is the official Office for National Statistics. I believe they've stopped reporting at the moment because there's such a low volume of transactions. You know, the volume of transactions, I think, went down from 100,000 to 50,000 in April, and the whole market dropped in terms of, you know, buyer activity, buyer interest, transactions, for obvious reasons, because we had the coronavirus lockdown. So it's difficult to really know exactly what's going on until we've had a longer period of transactions, and then we can see how it actually really works out in over, say, a year or even over a quarter or a half year. I think looking at things in isolation is a bit difficult and dangerous. And also, these are building society figures. This is from one lender. You've got the Halifax is the other major survey. They're one of the biggest lenders in the country. And then you've got the official figures that come out from Land Registry. These are the figures according to actual properties registered with the Land Registry when they're sold. And this would be the actual prices, and you could see the official price movement when a property has actually sold and been completed. Other surveys, you know, Zoopla look at activity. This is where you're looking at more live information on activity and sales and that sort of thing, whereas the Land Registry is based on actual completions, which can take, as we all know, many months to go through and complete. Now, the Prime Minister has announced what they call Project Speed. This is to reform the planning laws, to streamline the planning permission rules and process, and basically to remove a lot of the restrictions they feel are being imposed by local councils, local authorities. But obviously the local authorities represent their local people, and sometimes they don't want a new village next to their old village, or a new town next to them, or a block of flats, or a new housing development right on their doorstep. And I've seen this firsthand. But some of the changes that could be brought through as early as September, I mean, this is very fast. I mean, I don't know how these councils are going to react to this, but, you know, we're talking about months rather than years here. Allowing more commercial buildings to be changed to residential without residential use without planning permission, that's one thing. Reducing the normal planning process for builders, applying to demolish buildings and rebuild vacant residential and commercial buildings, and that's another thing, and allowing homeowners to build more up into the space of their roof space, sometimes called free space, free air space, via a fast track approval process. Well, Okay, I've seen a lot of that going on. You know, you only got to look out the window sometimes. You see this scaffolding above houses where they're all building up into the roof space. So I'm not sure how much more fast track it can get. And Boris also said that buildings deemed as essential to the lifeblood of communities, such as pubs, which would be right up his street, I guess, libraries, village shops, would be protected from these reforms. So presumably there would be more planning permission needed in these cases. However, I mean, I don't know. I mean, a lot of pubs are being converted at the moment. We've heard from the Chamber of the Chamber of Commerce for businesses that 1 in 10 businesses may not open up again. 1 in 10 small to medium-sized businesses will probably not open their doors again. And I'm sure that a lot of pubs and restaurants are going to struggle. I was in town in the West End last week and I saw a restaurant closed down. Bailiffs were breaking into the doors to gain access. So, I think a lot of these places are not going to survive, not just because of the lockdown, but because of the continuing reluctance of people to go out and go into pubs and restaurants, even though there's these safe distances. And of course, with distancing inside a building, you can have less customers, less money. The profits are going to go right down. So even if you've got an empty pub, I would imagine you'd be able to still acquire that and change that, the use of that. That's going on all the time. And in fact, local authorities are not really blocking those kind of applications. Now, why do I say that? I mean, I know that I have served on a planning committee as a local council. I've seen this first time, and we're also seeing at the moment many companies reducing their staff and reducing the need for large offices, and retail shops unfortunately are going out of business. I can see it around me. You've only got to look. We don't need to wait for official figures, but these changes should bring more opportunities for developers, if you're into property, to acquire buildings, repurpose new unused buildings, old unused buildings, and derelict buildings for residential use. This is going on all the time anyway. This is not new. And having served as a council, as I said, on a planning committee for 4 years, I witnessed firsthand that these things were going on, and that central government had taken away much of the decision-making powers from local councils and local planning committees. Planning laws have already gone through a massive range of reforms, and this creates a hell of a lot of work for staff in the planning offices and councils, and that all involve costs. They've had to change their local plan, they've had to employ consultants. It is a lot of work, and I've seen it firsthand from the other side. And we've already seen we've already seen changes to planning laws to give what they call permitted development rights to buildings. We've seen many offices disappear. They've been converted into to flats. So this is going on all the time. So I'm not quite sure what is new, what we're going to see, any really big changes. Unfortunately, the government are good at making these bold announcements, but later down the road they're perhaps watered down somewhat when it goes through Parliament. And of course, this money that is going to be spent on the build system, a lot of it has already been allocated anyway. It was already earmarked before the election as part of their plan to regenerate certain areas and regenerate hospitals and schools. So, governments of all persuasions have a habit of, we talk about repurposing buildings, they repurpose announcements, they bring them out again and have another announcement, yes, we're going to do this, and then a year later, yes, we're going to reform this. It's almost like repurposing a building as they keep announcing things. But we'll have to see. I'm sure there will be many opportunities out there for developers and property people. And if you're interested in property, if you'd like to know more about property, drop me a line. I'll put my email address up here, charles@charleskelly.net. Drop me a line, and there are many free seminars and webinars you can go on to learn about property and see if you can get into it. And you don't need a lot of money to do it. You can do a lot of these property deals without using your own money, especially the larger deals. If you can find developments, if you can find office developments, then the money is there if you know what you're doing. Okay, I wanted to move on to something else, which is about teaching your children and grandchildren about money. We know that more and more adults are falling into financial difficulty at the moment through bad credit, loans that go sour, mortgages, and the number one fear of retired adults is just running out of money. We saw on the news that more and more, the food banks have tripled the amount of food they're giving out. They're crying out for more money. I saw one report in London of people queuing up from 5 in.the.morning and a long queue to get into a food bank in London. I think it was in Kennington or Elephant and Castle somewhere. But I know that our local food bank, I've supported them through various charities, and I know that they are very busy at the moment, extremely busy, and there are other charities giving out food that are extremely busy. And apart from being a counsellor, I was also a financial advisor for 25 years, which is why I wrote this book, Yes, Money Can Buy You Happiness, which is based on my experience. And I go through things like the smart money system and how to manage your money. I talk about the relationship with money, and money and happiness, and money and being happy. So I've seen this going on firsthand. And as a financial advisor, I've also seen that money problems, money habits, bad money management habits and attitudes towards money, like money is the root of all evil, can pass through generations of children. And, we live in the most prosperous times in history. Yes, we've had a bit of a blip recently, but in general, we live in the most prosperous time in history, where people have more stuff, more gadgets, they're better off. This is in our world here, maybe not in war-torn countries, but certainly this is the most prosperous time in history. We've seen billions of people lifted out of poverty in places like China and Africa. And yet, in the UK, we still see families where 3 generations of that family have never worked, they've never saved any money, they've never lifted themselves out of poverty, and this is quite a sad thing. So there must be something the way people passing on their bad habits to their children. So what's the solution? Well, the solution is obviously education, to get smart with money, and as I said, this is one of the reasons why I wrote the book, because I don't think there's enough education going on in schools, and I'm sure that with the right education, maybe a grandparent can't be. They say you can't teach an old dog new tricks, but you can teach children new tricks. And with the right education, I'm sure that teenagers and young kids can get smart with money and learn how to manage their money better, because it's definitely not taught in schools still. And I remember the financial services industries having a campaign, it must be 30 years ago, to get schools to teach more about money to young kids, but I don't think it's happening now still. There was a campaign about a year ago through a charity, but that's just a drop in the ocean. The curriculum hasn't changed that much towards money. Now there's a renowned social media speaker called Paul O'Mahony that I've met many times. I've attended his course. He's a very smart guy, and he found that working with kids through accident, really, excuse me, he found that he was running a seminar, a course, and one of the parents had to bring their child in. I think he was a young boy of 11 or something like that, and the dad couldn't get the babysitting, so he brought his son along, and they said, yeah, let him sit in. And he found that the young boy was picking things up much faster than the adults. And in fact, he'd actually gone online and made £50 while the course was going on. And Paul then realised that he should do more work with children, because they are the people that get it. They pick things up faster. They haven't got all this baggage that perhaps some of us oldies have. So he then developed a system to teach kids how to be smarter with their money. Now Paul is running a webinar tonight, and I'll put a link up here. So if you're a parent, a grandparent, or you've got nieces, nephews, then maybe now's a good time to go and get them onto this webinar to teach them how to get smart financially. I think it calls it fun, doing it in a fun way, so that it's not boring for kids, but that's what, and I think it's going to be at a simple level, but a fun level, to get kids to learn more about money. And I'm certainly in favour of this, because I think a lot of kids leave school and they go to university, they get a small grant, or they get money from their parents, and they just blow it. They've got no idea how to manage it. I know, I've seen it myself. And even after university, they're not sure about mortgages, they're not sure about loans, they just take out expensive loans, they take out the wrong kind of loans, they get into trouble with their credit history, and then it's really then very difficult to get out of that. So I would like to see more of this. So have a look at the link on the Facebook page, and certainly I'll definitely join that and have a look at that. It's a free webinar tonight, so to just log on to that and register. So thanks for listening. Hi Des, how you doing there on Facebook? Great to see you. I hope your business is going well. Although I expect you must have suffered during this period, but I hope you can bounce back from that. And talking of bounce back loans, I've spoken to a lot of local business people and national business people who say they're still having trouble getting these bounce back loans through some of the banks. The banks are bringing in their own form of rules. And yes, there's some challenger banks like Starling and Tide will open a bank account for you, but they haven't got the money themselves. And my old friend Metro Bank are another bank that have just seem to be in chaos again. They're not getting these loans through to people who need them. So I think the government needs to really look at that and kick some of these banks up the backside, because the banks are taking a lot of this money and financial stimulus. A lot of it goes into banks, and like we saw back in 2008 and the aftermath of that banking crisis, a lot of the money is not trickling down to the people that need it in businesses that need business loans. So I think the government needs to do something about that. Talking about house prices, if you ever go on a course and people say house prices never fall, just don't believe them. It does happen. We saw that in 2008, according to the Halifax survey, we saw where we had a sort of a plus 10% rise in prices, then go to a minus 15% rise between 2008 and 2009. Prices really did drop. Then they shot up again by 2010, 2011, but they went down again 2012, and then took a couple of years then to recover to 2014, at which point they went down again and have been sort of gradually dwindling since then up to 2020, apart from a few small blips. Now these are the national figures. These can vary locally. So I think perhaps prices were a little bit inflated, and what happened, I think, after the up to 2010, we saw massive amounts of money going into the banking system and into the financial system through printing money, quantitative easing. That devalued the value of the pound in your pocket, as they say, and the dollar in your pocket, but it inflated the value of assets such as property. So I think then we saw an inflation of property up to 2010, and then as the stimulus ended, prices then dropped again. So we could see a bit of a bubble again. We could see all this quantitative easing inflate the value of assets. We could see a bit of a burst in the price of shares, as we are seeing now, and properties have gone up slightly. So we could see that. But then I think there could be, when that stimulus starts to come to an end, there could be another drop which could last much longer. But as long as you buy a property at the right price and you can get cash flow from the property, in some ways it doesn't matter if the price is going up or down. As long as you've got tenants who are paying you in rental terms, or if you're living in a property as a resident, you're buying the property as a resident, you get a good deal on the property. It doesn't really matter whether it's going up or down. And another thing the government are planning to do is massively build more social housing, which is really needed. We need more social housing. If you look back at old surveys on house building, after the war, we saw much of the house building being done by government and local authorities, and that lasted through to the late 70s. But then nothing. I mean, the town I'm living in now was built after the war as a new town, as an overspill from London, and many other towns were built like this as overspills from Crawley, Basildon. It was a bit later on, but a lot of towns were built around London as overspills from overcrowded places in London, and people moved out. Many of my family moved out from London to Milton Keynes, which I think was the last big city that was built, certainly large town that was built using imaginative ways of doing this, like building it on a train line. Hello, why don't you build a town around a train line and put a big new station there that links to London, links up north? Why build towns and villages in places where there's no transport infrastructure? And I mentioned this when I was in the planning committee. Why can't we build on a train line? Put housing developments on a train line. So it costs too much money to build a new station. It costs 10 million. I don't know why it costs 10 million. As far as I can see, a station is 2 lumps of concrete either side of a track and a couple of huts, or one hut with a bridge going over to the other side. I don't know why that costs £10 million, but anyway, that's their view of it. But we haven't seen any big new developments like the Basildons, the Harlow, and Milton Keynes since the 70s. And in fact, living in London in the 70s, I didn't see any new council estates being built after the 70s. I was in a part of North London. I remember the last one I think I saw was maybe around in Camden, around Kilburn. I remember seeing that going up, and maybe a few others here and there. But since the 70s, we haven't seen it. And in fact, councils refuse to build council estates because they say somebody might buy them. I've heard this in a council meeting. I've heard officers saying, well, if you build a council house, later on somebody might buy it. I said, well, so what if they buy it? At least they're in a house, so they own the house. You go and build another council house. What's the bloody difference whether they buy it? And in any case, most people probably wouldn't be able to afford to buy the council house around the London area. Because if you put someone who's on a minimum wage into a council house that is on the open market would be £500,000, how can they afford to buy that house on a minimum wage? They wouldn't be able to get the mortgage. And then he said, well, they get a 60% discount. I said, yeah, they don't get a 60% discount on the whole lot. They get a 60% discount up to a certain point. And anyway, that could be changed anyway. They seem to think that somebody could just buy this house in a couple of years. And what the difference does it make if they buy the house anyway? You've still got a family out of a hotel emergency accommodation into a house. And if they buy it 5 or 10 years down the road, all the better, isn't it? Isn't that better? What's wrong with that? The point is you should be building more of these houses. There's cheap money available to local authorities. They can borrow money at silly interest rates, probably like 1 or 2%, and then build houses. You cannot rely on this system of private developers, which we've had since the 80s, building houses but not providing enough social and affordable housing. Yes, there are developments where they give away a few crumbs here and there, but many of those are too expensive. They're not even affordable. What we need is proper social housing that people can afford and feel secure in those social houses, and that's one of the things that Boris has announced. But we'll have to see the detail. As I say, the devil is in the detail. We'll have to see how that really pans out further down the line when the legislation is fully published. So there you go. So thanks for listening to me today. If you want to learn more about how to teach your children about money, check out the link below, and there's a free webinar there. And I'll speak to you again soon. Thanks very much, and bye for now.